My spotlight guest tonight is Franklin Foer. He is the author of the book, The Last Politician, Inside Joe Biden's White House and the Struggle for America's Future. He's also a staff writer at The Atlantic, and he joins us from Washington, D.C. this evening. Thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure.
I first want to start on this Super Tuesday by asking you this. What is the struggle for America's future?
Right now, it's a struggle about whether we're going to continue to exist as a democracy in the form that it's taken for the last several generations, that really the system, the American system itself, is on the ballot this November. And if Joe Biden loses, it essentially tarnishes his legacy. And he came into office promising that his term would be defined by a struggle between democracy and autocracy, and here we are at this epical moment.
You know, we did hear that when Joe Biden was running, and you know, for some, it may have sounded like hyperbole. You don't think it is?
I don't, and I think over the course of his term, that's been the case. I mean, globally, certainly it has been the case, given that the war in Ukraine has been one of the defining foreign policy events of his presidency. And then certainly as we move into this next election, given the things that Donald Trump has talked about, what he'll do upon returning to office, the way in which he's going to purge the civil service and replace them with party loyalists, the way in which he has talked about plans for setting up camps for rounding up and deporting illegal immigrants. There are many ways, and also the way in which Trump himself has admitted that he'll be a dictator, at least for a day, upon returning to office, which augur pretty terribly for the future of American democracy if he comes back.
You spent quite a bit of time inside Biden's administration while writing your book. What impression of the president did you come away with? And compare and contrast that, if you would, with the impression that the Republicans are painting right now of an elderly man who is not completely there, and it would be a risk to vote him in again.
Yeah, that's right. If you listen to not just the Republicans, but to a lot of the insinuation that happens in newspaper columns and TV chatter in the United States, you get this impression that Joe Biden is aimlessly wandering the halls of the White House, that he's completely out to lunch, that somebody else is pulling the strings. And I got to tell you, there's no evidence to support that. In fact, what I found when I was reporting up close on the White House, I spent several years chronicling what was happening. What I saw was a president who was kind of the opposite of that. He was somebody who tended to throw himself into the details of policy, sometimes burying himself in minutia where he didn't need to be, and also very reluctant to delegate to a broader set of aides other than the ones he's known for a very long time who are clustered around him. But it was really clear to me that all the big decisions that were happening in the White House were owned by Joe Biden, that he was responsible for them, and that he considers himself to be his own best foreign policy and domestic policy advisor.
So why then do you think it has been very difficult for that message, communications-wise, to get out from the White House and for it to stick? Why is this other narrative sticking?
Well, so there are several aspects to the age question. There's the question, is he too old to govern? But there's this other question, does he have the stamina? Does he have the physical ability to go out and to sell what he's done? And I think he's struggled to do that. I mean, that is a place where age is a legitimate issue. I think that we live in an era where media is pretty much broken down. In the United States especially, you don't have network news, you don't have newspapers. Everything has become algorithmically derived content that bears little relation to the reality. And so you have a lot of Americans who actually believe that Donald Trump was responsible for passing an infrastructure bill, which he had zero to do with and actually told Republicans to oppose, when in fact it was Joe Biden who brought it into law. So it's both Biden's fault that he's not had a case that's more robustly resonated through the country, but it's also the times that we live in. So
in terms of the election cycle here, as we head toward November, do you think that will be the biggest challenge for him? Messaging?
I think his age is presenting itself as the biggest challenge
Uh-huh.
that he faces because it's the reason that voters express the most doubts about him. And I think it connects to all of the broader narratives that Republicans have created and some of the genuine problems that America faces. So you look at things like inflation, you look at immigration across the southern border, you look at the war in Gaza. It feels like the world is on fire. These are events that are kind of are spirals, and voters look at Joe Biden, and even if Joe Biden is doing a good job or as good a job as anybody possibly could do
Mhm.
containing some of these crises, they still look at him and they say he's an old man who can't possibly be working very hard to contain these crises, and they just see them spiraling out, and they start to yearn for a strong leader. And I think that's the biggest challenge that he faces.
I mean, your sense when you were in, following his staff around the White House, I noticed in, reading portions of your book, you think that one of the big challenges for him, if he does win a second term, will be retaining staff. Tell me why you think that that is such a major challenge.
Well, Joe Biden has a group of people who've clustered around him for decades. His first chief of staff, Ron Klain, was somebody who came to work with him in 1988 when he was 28 years old and spent all this time working with him. And Biden likes to operate in a bubble where he's with advisors that he trusts, because when he thinks through an issue, he's somebody who processes information and decisions in an extremely verbal sort of way. Obama was somebody who was very internal, who could retire to his study at the end of the evening and make a good decision. Biden needs to hash things out in a group setting where he'll say some stuff that he doesn't want to get leaked to the New York Times. And so he's going to have to learn to trust a different set of inside advisors.
Mm-hmm. Well, why do you think the Democrats chose to stick with Joe Biden? Because, as you know, I don't have to tell you what the polls are showing right now. They're showing that he is trailing. Make the argument for me in terms of why it is that Democrats are firmly behind Joe Biden right now, when polling suggests that perhaps they would be doing better if it was another Democratic candidate.
So I think there's two problems. One is that this is the normal course of doing business. Incumbent presidents tend to run for their second terms. And so you only have a handful of instances where they've decided not to do it. And there's not any real instance where a Democratic president, an incumbent president has been pushed aside for somebody else to run. So it would be very unusual for that to happen. And then I think the second thing is that there's risks involved with with an unknown. So Trump is a very known entity. Biden can make the case, I've beaten this guy before. We saw in 2016 what happens when you have an ideologically divisive primary, where a lot of the bad feelings that were ginned up in the course of the Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton campaign came to really hurt the Democrats in their general election, because there were Sanders supporters who said, I could never vote for this woman, and they didn't.
Well, let me just ask you this. We got to wrap up here. There's so much more to ask you, but, we watched from Canada here January 6th play out. Are you concerned that something like that could happen again in your country if the election results are not what a significant portion of the population wanted?
Of course, it's a risk. I think one of the sad facts of the last 4 years is that Biden was elected as a return to some sort of status quo. He was going to calm the roiling temperatures of the country. And for a time, it looked like that was the case. But I think if you look out into the world, you look at the spike of anti-Semitism, you look at you look at the devolution of social media, you'd have to say that political violence is in the air still. There's an incredible amount of hateful rhetoric percolating through American politics right now. And as Biden said the other day, Trump has never shown any sign of accepting defeat. So if he were to be defeated again, there's no reason that he wouldn't resort to the same sort of grievance politics, victimization, incitement that he resorted to the last go round.
Listen, I know this is a very busy night for you, so we appreciate you taking a little bit of time to chat with us here on Canada Tonight. That is Franklin Foer joining us from Washington, D.C.
My pleasure. Thank you.